ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। Namaste, my dear friends. This is video number 46 on Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna Parmahamsa. This video starts with chapter 41, Master's Boyhood Reminiscences. As a boy at Kamarpukur, I loved Ram Malik dearly, but afterwards, when he came here, I could not even touch him. Ram Malik and I were great friends during our boyhood. We were together day and night. We slept together. At the time I was 16 or 17 years old. People used to say if one of them were a woman, they would marry each other. Both of us used to play at his house. I remember those days very well. His relatives used to come riding in palanquins. Now he has a shop at Chanak. I sent for him many a time. He came here the other day and spent 2 days. Ram said he had no children. He brought up his nephew, but the boy died. He told me this with a sigh. His eyes were filled with tears. He was grief stricken for his nephew. He said further that since they had no children of their own, all his wife's affection had been turned to the nephew. She was completely overwhelmed with grief. Ram said to her, "You are crazy. What will you gain by grieving? Do you want to go to Banaras?" You see, he called his wife crazy. Grief for the boy totally diluted him. I found he had no stuff in him. I could not touch him. The Brahmin lady still stood near the north door. She was a widow. Her only daughter had been married to a very aristocratic man, a landlord in Calcutta with the title of Raja. Whenever the daughter visited her, she was escorted by liveried footmen. Then the mother's heart swelled with pride. Just a few days ago, the daughter had died, and now she was beside herself with sorrow. The Brahmin lady listened to the account of Ram Malik, Ram Malik's grief for his nephew. For the last few days, she had been running to the master from her home at Bagh Bazar like an insane person. She was eager to know whether Sri Ramakrishna could suggest any remedy for her unquenchable grief. Sri Ramakrishna resumed the conversation. "Master, a man came here the other day. He sat a few minutes and then said, 'Let me go and see the moon face of my child.' I could not control myself and said, 'So you prefer your son's moon face to God's moon face? Get out, you fool!' Magician and his magic. To M. The truth is that God alone is real and all else unreal. Man, universe, house, and children, all these are like the magic of the magician. The magician strikes his wand and says, 'Come delusion, come confusion.' Then he says to the audience, open the lid of the pot, see the birds fly into the sky, but the magician alone is real and his magic unreal. The unreal exists for a second and then vanishes. Shiva was seated in Kailas. His companion Nandi was near him. Suddenly, a terrific noise arose. Revered sir, asked Nandi, what does that mean? Shiva said, Ramana is born. That is its meaning. A few moments later, another terrific noise was heard. Now, what is this noise? Nandi asked. Shiva said with a smile, now Ravana is dead. Birth and death are like magic. You see the magic for a second and then it disappears. God alone is real and all else unreal. Water alone is real, its bubbles appear and disappear. They just disappear into the very water from which they rise. God is like an ocean, and living beings are its bubbles. They are both there and they are dying. Children are like the few small bubbles around a big one. God alone is real. Make an effort to cultivate love for Him and find out the means to realize Him. What will you gain by grieving? All sat in silence. The Brahmin lady said, may I go home now? The master said to her tenderly, do you want to go now? It is very hot. Why now? You can go later in a carriage with the devotees. Because the day was so hot, a devotee gave the master a new fan made of sandalwood. He was very much pleased and said, good, good. Om Tat Sat Kali. First he found the pictures of the gods and goddesses and then he found himself. He said to M, see, feel the breeze. M was highly pleased. Captain arrived with his children. Sri Ramakrishna said to Kishori, please show the temples to the children. He began to talk to Captain. M. Divija and the other devotees were sitting on the floor. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on the small couch facing the north. He asked Captain to sit in front of him on the same couch. Master, I was telling the devotees about you, your devotion, worship, and arti. Captain bashfully, what do I know of worship and arti? How insignificant I am. Harmless ego. Master, only the ego that is attached to woman and gold is harmful. But the ego that feels it is the servant of God does no harm to anybody. Neither does the ego of a child which is not under the control of any guna. One moment children quarrel and the next moment they are on friendly terms. One moment they build their toy houses with great care and immediately afterwards they knock them down. There is no harm in the I consciousness that makes one feel oneself to be a child of God or his servant. This ego is really no ego at all. It is like sugar candy, which is not like other sweets. Other sweets make one ill, but sugar candy relieves acidity. Or take the case of Om, it is unlike other sounds. With this kind of ego, one is able to love Satchitananda. It is impossible to get rid of the ego. Therefore, it should be made to feel that it is the devotee of God, his servant. Otherwise, how can one live? How intense was the love of the gopis for Sri Krishna? To Captain, please tell us something about the gopis. You read the Bhagavata so much. Captain, when Sri Krishna lived at Vrindavan without any of his royal splendor, even then the gopis loved him more than their own souls. Therefore Sri Krishna said, how shall I be able to pay off my debt to the gopis who surrendered to me all their bodies, minds and souls? Captain's words awakened intense love for Krishna in the master's mind. He exclaimed, Govinda, 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 and was able to go into an ecstatic mood. Captain was amazed and said, how blessed he is, how blessed he is. Captain and the devotees watched his love ecstasy of Sri Ramakrishna. They sat quietly gazing at him, awaiting his return to the consciousness of the world. Master, tell us more. Captain, Sri Krishna is unattainable by yogis like you, but he can be attained by lovers like the gopis. How many years did the yogis practice yoga for his vision? Yet they did not succeed, but the gopis realized him with such ease. Master smiling, yes, he ate from the hands of the gopis, wept for them, played with them, and made many demands on them. A devotee, Bankim, has written a life of Krishna. Master, he accepts Krishna but not Radhika. Captain, I see he doesn't accept Krishna's Leela with the gopis. Master, I also hear that Bankim says that one needs passions such as lust. A devotee, he has written in his magazine that the purpose of religion is to give expression to our various faculties, physical, mental, and spiritual. Captain, I see. He believes that lust and so forth are necessary, but he doesn't believe that Sri Krishna could enjoy his sportive pleasure in the world, that God could incarnate himself in a human form and sport in Vrindavan with Radha and the gopis. Master smiling, but these things are not written in the newspaper. How could he believe them? A man said to his friend, yesterday, as I was passing through a certain part of the city, I saw a house fall with a crash. Wait, said the friend, let me look it up in the newspaper. But this incident was not mentioned in the paper. Thereupon the man said, but the paper doesn't mention it. His friend replied, I saw it with my own eyes. Be that as it may be, said the man, I can't believe it as long as it is not in the paper. How can Bankim believe that God speaks about as a man? He doesn't get it from his English education. It is very hard to explain how God fully incarnates himself as man. Is not that so? The manifestation of infinity in this human body only 3.5 cubits tall. Captain, Krishna is God himself. In describing him, we have to use such terms as whole and part. Master, whole and part are like fire and its spark. An incarnation of God is for the sake of the bhaktas and not of the jnanis. It is said in the Adhyatma Ramayana that Rama alone is both the pervading spirit and everything pervaded. You are the Supreme Lord, distinguished as the Vachka, the signifying symbol, and the Vachya, the object signified. Captain, the signifying symbol means the pervader, and the object signified means the thing pervaded. Master, the pervader in this case is a finite form. It is God incarnating himself as a human being. Sri Ramakrishna was talking thus to Captain and the devotees when Jagopal Sen and Tarlokya of the Brahmosmas arrived. They saluted the master and sat down. Sri Ramakrishna looked at Trilokya with a smile and continued the conversation. Wicked ego must be killed. Master, it is on account of the ego that one is not able to see God. In front of the door of God's mansion lies the stump of ego. One cannot enter the mansion without jumping over the stump. There was once a man who had acquired the power to tame ghosts. One day at his summons a ghost appeared. The ghost said, "Now tell me what you want me to do. The moment you cannot give me any work, I shall break your neck." The man had many things to accomplish, and he had the ghost do them all one by one. At last he could find nothing more for the ghost to do. "Now," said the ghost, "I am going to break your neck." "Wait a minute," said the man, "I shall return presently." He ran to his teacher and said, "Revered sir, I am in a great danger. This is my trouble." And he told his teacher his trouble and asked, "What shall I do now?" The teacher said, "Do this, tell the ghost to straighten the kinky hair." The ghost devoted itself day and night to straightening the hair, but how could it make a kinky hair straight? The hair remained kinky. Likewise, the ego seems to vanish this moment, but it reappears the next. Unless one renounces the ego, one does not receive the grace of God. Suppose there is a feast in a house, and master of the house puts a man in charge of the stores. As long as the man remains in the storeroom, the master does not go there. But when of his own will he renounces the storeroom and goes away, then the master locks it and takes charge of it himself. A guardian is appointed only for a minor. A boy cannot safeguard his property. Therefore, the king assumes the responsibility for him. God does not take over our responsibilities unless we renounce our ego. Once Lakshmi and Narayana were seated in Vaikuntha. When Narayana suddenly stood up, Lakshmi had been stroking his feet. She said, "Lord, where are you going?" Narayana answered, "One of my devotees in great danger. I must save him." With these words he went out, but he came back immediately. Lakshmi said, "Lord, why have you returned so soon?" Narayana smiled and said, "The devotee was going along the road overwhelmed with love for me. Some washermen were drying clothes on the grass, and the devotee walked over the clothes. At this, the washermen chased him and were going to beat him with their sticks. So I ran out to protect him. But why have you come back?" asked Lakshmi. Narayana laughed and said, "I saw the devotee himself picking up a brick to throw at them. All laughed, so I came back. I said to Keshav, you must renounce your ego. Keshav replied, if I do, how can I keep my organization together? I said to him, how slow you are to understand. I am not asking you to renounce the ripe ego, the ego that makes a man feel he is a servant of God or his devotee. Give up the unripe ego, the ego that creates attachment to woman and gold, the ego that makes a man feel he is God's servant, his child is the ripe ego, it does not harm one. Tarlokya. It is very difficult to get rid of the ego. People only think they are free from it. Master Gauri would not refer to himself as I, lest he should feel egotistic. He would say this instead. I followed his example and would refer to myself as this instead of I. Instead of saying I have eaten, I would say this has eaten. Mathur noticed it and said one day, what is this, revered father? Why should you talk that way? Let them talk that way. They have their egotism. You are free from it. You don't have to talk like them. I said to Keshav, since the ego cannot be given up, let it remain as the servant of God. Prahlada had two moods. Sometimes he would feel that he was God. In that mood he would say, thou art verily I, and I am verily thou. But when he was conscious of his ego, he felt that God was the master and he was his servant. After a man is firmly established in the ideal of I am he can live as God's servant. He may then think of himself as the servant of God. Signs of God realization. To Captain, when a man attains the knowledge of Brahma, he shows certain characteristics. The Bhagavata describes four of them. The state of a child, of an inert thing, of a madman, and of a ghoul. Sometimes the knower of Brahma acts like a 5-year-old child. Sometimes he acts like a madman. Sometimes he remains like an inert thing. In this state he cannot work. He renounces all action. You may say that Gyanis like Janka were active. The truth is that people in olden times gave responsibility to their subordinate officers and thus freed themselves from worry. Further, at that time, men possessed intense faith. Sri Ramakrishna began to speak about the renunciation of action. But he also said that those who felt they must do their duties should do them in a detached spirit. Master, after attaining knowledge, one cannot do much work. Tarlokya. Why so, sir? Pavahari Baba was a great yogi and yet he reconciled people's quarrels, even lawsuits. Master, yes, that is true. Dr. Durgacharan was a great drunkard. He used to drink 24 hours a day, but he was precise in his actions. He did not make any mistakes in treating his patients. There is no harm in doing work after the attainment of bhakti, but it is very hard. One needs intense tapasya. It is God who does everything. We are His instruments. Some Sikhs said to me in front of the Kali temple, God is compassionate. I said, to whom is he compassionate? Why, Revered sir, to all of us, said the Sikhs. I said, we are his children. Does compassion to one's own children means much? A father must look after his children, or do you expect the people of the neighborhood to bring them up? Well, won't those who say that God is compassionate ever understand that we are God's children and not someone else's? Captain, you are right. They don't regard God as their own. Master, should we not then address God as compassionate? Of course we should, as long as we practice sadhana. After realizing God, one rightly feels that God is our father or mother. As long as we have not realized God, we feel that we are far away from Him, children of someone else. During this stage of sadhana, one should describe God by all His attributes. One day Hajra said to Narendra, God is infinity. Infinite is his splendor. Do you think he will accept your offerings of sweets and bananas or listen to your music? This is a mistaken notion of yours. Narendra at once sank 10 fathoms. So I said to Hajra, you villain, where will these youngsters be if you talk to them like that? How can a man live if he gives up devotion? No doubt God has infinite splendor. He is under the control of his devotees. A rich man's gatekeeper comes to the parlor where his master is seated with his friends. He stands on one side of the room. In his hand he has something covered with a cloth. He is very hesitant. The master asks him, well, gatekeeper, what have you in your hand? Very hesitantly, the servant takes out a custard apple from under the cover, places it in front of his master, and says, sir, it is my desire that you should eat this. The master is impressed by his servant's devotion. With great love, he takes the fruit in his hand and says, ah, this is a very nice custard apple. Where did you pick it? You must have taken a great deal of trouble to get it. God is under the control of his devotees. King Duryodhana was very attentive to Krishna and said to him, please have your meal here. But the Lord went to Vidura's hut. He is very fond of his devotees. He ate Vidura's simple rice and greens as if they were celestial food. Sometimes a perfect jnani behaves like a ghoul. He does not discriminate about food and drink, holiness and unholiness. A perfect knower of God and a perfect idiot have the same outer signs. A perfect jnani perhaps does not utter the mantras while bathing in the Ganges. While worshipping God, perhaps he offers all the flowers together at his feet. He does not utter the mantras, nor does he observe the rituals. A man cannot renounce action as long as he desires worldly enjoyment. As long as one cherishes a desire for enjoyment, one performs action. A bird sat absent-mindedly on the mast of a ship anchored in the Ganges. Slowly the ship sailed out into the ocean. When the bird came to its senses, it could find no shore in any direction. It flew towards the north, hoping to reach land. It went very far and grew very tired, but could find no shore. What could it do? It returned to the ship and sat on the mast. After a long while, the bird flew away again, this time towards the east. It could not find land in that direction either. Everywhere it saw nothing but limitless ocean. Very tired, it again returned to the ship and sat on the mast. After resting a long while, the bird went toward the south and towards the west. When it found no sign of land in any direction, it came back and settled down on the mast. It did not leave the mast again, but sat there without making any further effort. It no longer felt restless or worried. Because it was free from worry, it made no further effort. Captain, ah, what an illustration! Man's peace in God. Master, worldly people wander about to the four quarters of the earth for the sake of happiness. They don't find it anywhere. They only become tired and weary when, through their attachment to woman and gold, they only suffer misery. They feel an urge towards dispassion and renunciation. Most people cannot renounce woman and gold without first enjoying it. There are two sorts of people, those who stay in one place and those who go about to many places. There are some sadhakas who visit many sacred places. They cannot settle down in one spot. They must drink the water of many holy places. Thus, roaming about there, they satisfy their unfulfilled desires, and at last they build a hut in one place and settle down there. Then, free from worry and effort, they meditate on God. But what is there to enjoy in the world? Woman and gold. That is only a momentary pleasure. One moment it exists and the next moment it disappears. Sincere yearning enables one to realize God. The world is like an overcast sky that steadily pours down rain. The face of the sun is seldom seen. There is mostly suffering in the world. On account of the cloud of woman and gold, one cannot see the sun. Some people ask me, Sir, why has God created such a world? Is there no way out for us? I say to them, why should not there be a way out? Take shelter with God and pray to Him with a yearning heart for a favorable wind that you may have things in your favor. If you call on Him with yearning, He will surely listen to you. A man had a son who was on the point of death. In frenzy, he asked the remedies of different people. One of them said, here is a remedy. First, it must rain when the star Swati is in the ascendant, then some of the rain must fall into a skull, then a frog must come there to drink the water, and a snake must chase it, and when the snake is about to bite the frog must hop away, and the poison must fall onto the skull. You should give the patient a little of the poison and rain water from the skull. The father set out eagerly to find the medicine. When the star Swati was in the sky, it started raining fervently. He said to God, O Lord, please get a skull for me. Searching here and there, he at last found a skull with a rainwater in it. Again he prayed to God, saying, O Lord, I beseech thee, Please help me find the frog and the snake. Since he had great longing, he got the frog and the snake also. In the twinkling of an eye, he saw a snake chasing a frog, and as it was about to bite the frog, its poison fell into the skull. If one takes shelter with God and prays to Him with a great longing, God will surely listen. He will certainly make everything favorable. Captain, what an apt illustration. Master, yes, God makes everything favorable. Perhaps the aspirant doesn't marry. Thus he is able to devote his whole attention to God. Or perhaps his brothers earn the family's livelihood. Or perhaps a son takes on the responsibility of the family. Then the aspirant will not have to bother about the world. He can give 100% of his mind to God. But one cannot succeed unless one renounces woman and gold. Only by renunciation is ignorance destroyed. The sun's rays falling on a lens burn many objects, but if a room is dark inside, you cannot get that result. You must come out of the room to use the lens. But some people live in the world even after attaining jnana. They see both what is inside and what is outside the room. The light of God illumines the world. Therefore, with that light, they can discriminate between good and bad, permanent and impermanent. The ignorant who lead a worldly life without knowing God are like people living in a house with mud walls. With the help of a dim light, they can see the inside of the house, but nothing more. But those who live in the world after having attained knowledge and realized God are like people living in a glass house. They see the inside of the room and also all that is outside. The light from the sun of knowledge enters strongly into the room. They perceive everything inside the room very clearly. They know what is good and what is bad, what is permanent and what is impermanent. God alone is the doer and we are all his instruments. Therefore, it is impossible even for a jnani to be egotistic. The writer of a hymn to Shiva felt proud of his achievement, but his pride was dashed to pieces. When Shiva's bull bared his teeth, he saw that each tooth was a word of the hymen. Do you understand the meaning of this? These words had existed from the beginning, less past. The writer had only discovered them. It is not good to be a guru by profession. One cannot be a teacher without a command from God. He who says he is a guru is a man of mean intelligence. Have not you seen a balance? The lighter side goes higher. He who is spiritually higher than others does not consider himself a guru. Everyone wants to be a teacher, but a disciple is hard to find. Terlokaya was seated on the floor to the north of the small couch. He was going to sing. Sri Ramakrishna said to him, "Ah, how sweetly you sing." Tarlokya sang to the accompaniment of a tanpura. I have joined my heart to thee. All that exists art thou. Thee only have I found, for thou art all that exists. O Lord, beloved of my heart, thou art the home of all, where indeed is the heart in which thou dost not dwell. Thou hast entered every heart, all that exists art thou, whether sage or fool, whether Hindu or Mussulman, thou makest them as thou wilt, all that exists art thou. Thy presence is everywhere, whether in a heaven or in Kaaba. Before thee all must bow, for thou art all that exists. From earth below to the highest heaven, from heaven to deepest earth. I see thee wherever I look, all that exists art thou. Pondering, I have understood, I have seen it beyond a doubt. I find not a single thing that may be compared to thee. To Zephyr it has been revealed, thou that thou art all that exists. He sang again, thou art my all in all, O Lord, the life of my life, the essence of essence. In the three worlds I have none else but thee to call my own. Thou art my peace, my joy, my hope. Thou my sport, my wealth, my glory. Thou art my wisdom and my strength. Thou art my home, my place of rest, my dearest friend, my next of kin, my present and my future. Thou my heaven and my salvation. Thou art my scriptures, my commandments. Thou art my ever gracious grove. Thou the spring of my boundless bliss. Thou art the way and thou the goal. Thou the adorable one, O Lord. Thou art the mother tender hearted. Thou the chastising father. Thou the creator and protector, thou the helpsman who does steer my craft across the sea of life. When Sri Ramakrishna listened to the songs, he was overwhelmed with emotion. Again and again he said, Ah, thou art all, ah, me, ah, me. The music was over. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. Sri Ramakrishna went to the pine grove and accompanying him. Sri Ramakrishna was laughing and talking. Suddenly he said to M, why have not you eaten any refreshments? Why have not the others eaten either? He was eager for the devotees to take some refreshments. Sri Ramakrishna was to go to Calcutta in the evening. While returning from the pine grove, he said to M, I don't, I don't know who will take me to Calcutta in his carriage. It was evening. A lamp was lighted in Sri Ramakrishna's room and incense was burnt. Lamps also were lighted in the different temples and buildings. The orchestra was playing in the Nahabats. Soon the evening service would begin in the temples. Sri Ramakrishna sat on the small couch. After chanting the names of the different deities, he meditated on the Divine Mother. The evening service was over. Sri Ramakrishna paced the room now and then, talking to the devotees. He also consulted M about his going to Calcutta. Presently, Narendra arrived. He was accompanied by Sarat and one or two other young devotees. They all saluted the master. At the sight of Narendra, Sri Ramakrishna's love overflowed. He tenderly touched Narendra's chin as one touches the baby's to show one's love. He said in a loving voice, Ah, you have come. The master was standing in his room. Facing the Ganges, Narendra and his young friends were talking to him. Facing the east, the master turned towards him and said, Narendra has come. How can I go to Calcutta now? I sent for Narendra. How can I go now? What do you think? As you wish, sir, let us put it off today. Master, all right, we shall go tomorrow either by boat or by carriage. To the other devotees, it is late. Go home now. One by one, the devotees saluted him and departed. Chapter 42 Car Festival at Balram's House. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in Balram's drawing room with the devotees. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. Balram was going to celebrate the car festival the following day. The deity Jagannath was worshipped daily at his house. He had a small car which would be drawn along the veranda to celebrate the festival. The master had been specially invited for the occasion. Sri Ramakrishna and M were talking together. Narayan, Tej Chandra, Balram, and other devotees were in the room. The master was talking about Purna, a lad of 15. He was very eager to see the boy. Master to M. Well, by which road will he come to see me? Please have Purna and Divja meet each other. When two people are of the same age and have the same inner nature, I bring them together. There is a meaning in this. In this way, both make progress. Have you noticed Purna's longing for God? M. Yes, sir. One day I was riding on a tram. He saw me from the room of his house and ran down to the street with great fervor. He saluted me from the street. Master with tears in his eyes. Ah, ah, it is because you have helped him make the contact through which he will find out the supreme ideal of his life. One doesn't act like that unless one longs for God. Narendra, the younger Naren and Purna, these three have a manly nature. It is not so with Bhavna. He has a womanly nature. Master on Purna. Purna is in such an exalted state that either he will very soon give up his body, the body is useless after the realization of God, or his inner nature will within a few days burst forth. Purna's divine traits. He has a divine nature, the traits of a god. It makes a person less fearful of man. If you put a garland of flowers around his neck, or smear his body with sandal paste, or burn incense before him, he will go into samadhi. For them he will know beyond the shadow of a doubt that Narayana himself dwells in his body, that it is Narayana who has assumed the body. I have come to know about it. A few days after my first experience of the God intoxicated state at Dakshineswar, a lady of a Brahmin family arrived there. She had many good traits. No sooner was a garland put round her neck and incense burnt before her than she went into samadhi. A few moments later she experienced great bliss. Tears streamed from her eyes. I saluted her and said, Mother, shall I succeed? Yes, she replied. I want to see Purna once more, but how will it be possible for me? It seems he is a part. How amazing! Not a mere particle, but a part very intelligent too. I understand that he is very clever in his studies, therefore I have hit it right. By dint of austerity, a man may obtain God as his son. By the roadside on the way to Kamarpukur is Ranjit Raya's lake. Bhagavati, the Divine Mother, was born as his daughter. Even now, people hold an annual festival there in the month of Chaitra in honor of this divine daughter. I feel very much like going there. Story of Ranjit Raya. Ranjit Raya was the landlord of that part of the country. Though the power of his tapasya, he obtained the Divine Mother as his daughter. He was very fond of her, and she too was much attached to him. She hardly left his presence. One day Ranjit Raya was engaged in the duties of his estate. He was very busy. The girl, with her childlike nature, was constantly interrupting him, saying, "Father, what is this? What is that?" Ranjit Raya tried with sweet words to persuade her not to disturb him and said, "My child, please leave me alone. I have much work to do." But the girl would not go away. At last, absent mindedly, the father said, "Get out of here." On this pretext, she left home. A peddler of conch shell articles was going along the road. From him, she took a pair of bracelets for her wrist. When he asked for the price, she said that he could get the money from a certain box in her home. Then she disappeared. Nobody saw her again. In the meantime, the peddler came to the house and asked for the price of his bracelets. When she was not to be found at home, her relatives began to run about looking for her. Ranjit Raya sent people in all directions to search for her. The money owed to the peddler was found in the box. As she had indicated, Ranjit Raya was weeping bitterly. When people came running to him and said that they had noticed something in the lake, they all ran there and saw an arm with conch shell bracelets on the wrist being waved above the water. A moment afterwards it disappeared. Even now people worship her as the Divine Mother at the time of the annual festival. To M, all this is true. M, yes sir. Master, Narendra now believes these things. Purna was born with an element of Vishnu. I worshipped him mentally with bay leaves, but the offering was not accepted. Then I worshipped him with a tulsi leaves and sandal paste. That proved to be all right. God reveals himself in many ways, sometimes as man, sometimes in other divine forms made of spirit. One must believe in divine forms. What do you say? M. It is true, sir. Gopal Ma. Master, the Brahmini of Kamarhati sees many visions. She lives all by herself in a lonely room in a garden on the bank of the Ganges. She spends her time in japa. Gopala with her. The master gives a start. It is not imagination, but fact. She saw that Gopala's palms were red. He walks with her. She suckles him at her breast. They talk to each other. When Narendra heard the story, he wept. Formerly, I too used to see many visions, but now in my ecstatic state, I don't see so many. I am gradually getting over my feminine nature. I feel nowadays more like a man. Therefore, I control my emotion. I do not manifest it outwardly so much. The younger Naren has the nature of a man. Therefore, in meditation, his mind completely merges in the ideal. He does not show emotion. Nitya Gopal has a feminine nature. Therefore, while he is in a spiritual mood, his body becomes distorted and twisted. It becomes flushed. To M, well, people renounce grain by grain, but what a mood these youngsters are in. To M, well, people renounce. Vinod said, I have to sleep with my wife. That makes me feel very bad. It is bad for an aspirant to sleep with his wife, whether he has intercourse with her or not. There is the friction of the body and also the physical warmth with a state Divja is passing through. What a state Divja is passing through. In my presence, he only sways his body and fixes his glance on me. Is that a trifle thing? If a man gathers his whole mind and fixes it on me, then indeed he achieves everything. God dwelling in the Master. But what am I? It is all He. I am the machine and He is its operator. It is God alone who exists in this, meaning His body. That is why so many people are feeling more and more attracted to it. A mere touch is enough to awaken their spirituality. The attraction this pull is the attraction of God and of none else. Tarak of Belghadia was going home from Dakshineshwar. I dearly noticed that a flame-like thing came out of this, meaning his body, and followed him. A few days later, Tarak came back to Dakshineshwar. In a state of samadhi, he who dwells in this body placed his foot on Tarak's chest. Well, are there more youngsters like these? M. Mohit is very nice. He came to you once or twice. He is studying enough books to pass two university examinations. He has great longing for God. Master, that may be, but he does not belong to a high plane. His physical traits are not so good. He has a puggish face, but these other youngsters belong to a high place. Worries associated with human birth. Many troubles and worries follow in the wake of a birth in a physical body. Further, if a person is cursed, he may have to be born 7 times. One must be very careful. One has to assume a human body if one cherishes the slightest desire. A devotee, what are the desires of those who are incarnations of God? Master smiling, I find that I have not got rid of all my desires. Once I saw a holy man with a shawl, and I too wanted to put on one like it. Even now I have that desire. I don't know whether I shall have to be born again for it. Balram smiling, then will you be born again just for a shawl or love? Master smiling, one has to keep a good desire so that one may give up the body meditating on it. There are four holy places for the sadhus to visit. They visit three and they leave out one. Many of them leave out Puri, the place of Jagannath, so that they can give up their bodies meditating on Jagannath. A man dressed in an ochre robe entered the room and greeted the master. Privately, he was in the habit of criticizing Sri Ramakrishna, so at the sight of him, Balram laughed. Sri Ramakrishna could read a man's mind. He said to Balram, "Never mind, let him say I am a cheat." Sri Ramakrishna was talking to Tej Chandra, Master. I send for you so often. Why don't you come? If you practice meditation and prayer, it will make me happy. I look on you as my own. That is why I send for you, Tej Chandra. Sir, I have to go to office. I am very busy with my duties. I am smiling. There was a marriage ceremony at his home and he got leave from his office for 10 days. Master, well, you say you have no leisure. You told me just now that you were going to renounce the world. Narayan M said to us one day that this world is a wilderness. Master to M, please tell them the story of the disciple who became unconscious after taking the medicine. His teacher arrived at the house and said he would revive if someone else swallowed a pill that he would prescribe. The disciple would get back his life, but the man who swallowed the pill would die. Please tell the other one too of the Hatha yogi who thought that his wife and children were his very own and who feigned death with his limbs stretched out. It will do them good to hear those stories. It was known Sri Ramakrishna partook of the food that had been offered to the family deity Jagannath. The master often used to say that the food at Balram's house was very pure. Afterwards, he rested a while. Late in the afternoon, Sri Ramakrishna sat with the devotees in the drawing room of Balram's house. Chandra Babu of the Kartabhaja sect and a witty Brahmin were there. The Brahmin was something of a buffoon. His words made everybody laugh. About 6 o'clock, Grace's brother Atul and Tej Chandra's brother arrived. Sri Ramakrishna was in Samadhi. A few minutes later, he said, theist, still in the aesthetic mood. Can one become unconscious by meditating on consciousness? Can one lose one's mind by thinking of God? God is of the very nature of knowledge. He is of the very nature of eternity, purity, and consciousness. Sri Ramakrishna said to the witty Brahmin, why do you waste your time with these frivolous jokes about insignificant worldly things? Direct your mind to God. If a man can calculate about salt, he can also calculate about sugar candy. Brahmin smiling, please attract me. Master, what can I do? Everything depends on your effort. Your mind is very own. Your mind is your own. Give up this trifling buffoonery and go forward towards God. You can go farther and farther along that way. The brahmachari asked the woodcutter to go forward. At first, the woodcutter found a sandalwood forest, next a silver mine, next a gold mine, and then gems and diamonds. Brahmin, there is no end to this path. Master, where you find peace, there is the end. About a new visitor, Sri Ramakrishna said, I did not find any substance in him. He seemed worthless. It was dusk. Lamps were lighted in the room. Sri Ramakrishna was meditating on the Divine Mother and chanting her name in his melodious voice. The devotees sat around him. Since Balram was going to celebrate the car festival at his house the following day, Sri Ramakrishna intended to spend the night there. After taking some refreshments in the inner apartments, Sri Ramakrishna returned to the parlor. It was about 10 o'clock. The master said to M, please bring my towel from the other room. A bed was made for Sri Ramakrishna in the adjoining small room. About 10:30, Sri Ramakrishna lay down to sleep. It was summer time. He said to M, you had better bring a fan. He asked the disciple to fan him. At midnight, Sri Ramakrishna woke up. He said to M, don't fan me anymore. I feel chilly. Tuesday, July 14, 1885. It was the day of the car festival. Sri Ramakrishna left his bed very early in the morning. He was alone in the room, dancing and chanting the name of God. M entered and saluted the master. Other devotees arrived one by one. They saluted the master and took seats near him. Sri Ramakrishna was longing intensely for Purna. He was talking to M about him. Master, did you give Purna any instruction? M. I asked him to read the life of Chaitanya. He is familiar with the incidents of his life. I told him further that you ask people to stick to the truth. Master, how did he take it when you said about me, he is an incarnation of God? And I said to him, come with me if you want to see a person like Chaitanya. Master, anything else? And also that remark of yours that when an elephant enters a small pool, there is a great splashing of water all around. Likewise, in the case of a small receptacle, emotion overflows about his giving up of fish. I said to him, why have you done that? Your family will make a great fuss about it. Master, that is good. One should keep one's feelings and emotions to oneself. It was about 6:30 in the morning. M was going to bathe in the Ganges when suddenly tremors of an earthquake were felt. At once he returned to Sri Ramakrishna's room. The master stood in the drawing room. The devotees stood around him. They were talking about the earthquake. The shaking had been rather violent, and many of the devotees were frightened. And you should all have gone downstairs. Master, such is the fate of the house under whose roof one lives, and still people are so egotistic. To M, do you remember the great storm of the month of Aswin? And yes, sir, I was very young at that time, 9 or 10 years old. I was alone in a room while the storm was raging and I prayed to God. M was surprised and said to himself, why did the master suddenly ask me about the great storm of Aswin? Does he know that I was alone at that time, earnestly praying to God with tears in my eyes? Does he know all this? Has he seen protecting me as my Guru since my very birth? Master, it was quite late in the day at Dakshineswar when the storm broke, but somehow they managed to cook the meals. The trees were uprooted. You see, this is the fate of the house one lives in. Nitya and Leela. But when one attains perfect knowledge, then one finds that dying and killing are one and the same thing. That is to say, both are unreal. When one is dead, one has not really died, and when one has killed another, the man is not really dead. Both the Leela and the Nitya belong to the same reality. In one form, it is the Absolute, and in another, the Leela. Even though the Leela is destroyed, the Nitya always exists. Water is water, whether it is still or in waves. It is the same water when the waves quiet down. Sri Ramakrishna sat in the drawing room with the devotees. Mahendra Mukherjee, Hari, the younger Naren, and many other devotees were there. Hari lived alone and studied Vedanta. He was about 23 years old and unmarried. Sri Ramakrishna was very fond of him. He wanted Hari to visit him frequently, but since Hari loved solitude, he did not often come to the master. Master to Hari, well, I have not seen you for a long time. A sense of Vedanta and absolute and relative are co-relatives. You see, in one form he is the absolute, and in another he is the relative. What does Vedanta teach? Brahma alone is real and the world illusory. Is not that so? But as long as God keeps the ego of a devotee in a man, the relative is also real. When he completely effaces the ego, then what is remains that cannot be described by the tongue. But as long as God keeps the ego, one must accept all. By removing the outer seeds of the plant and tree, you reach the inner pith. As long as the tree contains seeds, it also contains pith. So too, as long as it contains pith, it also contains seeds. The pith goes with the seeds and the seeds go with the pith. In the same way, when you speak of the Nitya, it is understood that the Leela also exists. And when you speak of the Leela, it is understood that the Nitya also exists. Brahma and Shakti. It is He alone who has become the universe, living beings, and the 24 cosmic principles. When He is actionless, I call Him Brahma. When He creates, preserves, and destroys, I call Him Shakti. Brahma and Shakti are not different from each other. Water is water whether it is still or moving. It is not possible to rid oneself of I consciousness, and as long as one is aware of this I consciousness, one cannot speak of the universe and its living beings as unreal. You cannot get the correct weight of the bell fruit if you leave out its shell and pits. The brick, lime, and brick dust of which the stairs are made are the same brick, lime, and brick dust of which the roof is made. The universe and its living beings exist on account of the reality of Him who is known as Brahma. Synthesis of formless reality and God with form. The devotees, I mean, the Vigyanis accept both God with form and the formless, both the personal God and the impersonal. In a shoreless ocean, an infinite expanse of water visible, blocks of ice are formed here and there by intense cold. Similarly, under the cooling influence, so to say, of the deep love of its worshipper, the infinite reduces itself to the finite and appears before the worshipper as God with form. Again, as on the rising of the sun the ice melts away, so on the awakening of knowledge, God with form melts away into the same infinite and formless. As long as a man analyzes with the mind, he cannot reach the absolute. As long as you reason with your mind, you have no way of getting rid of the universe and the objects of the senses form, taste, smell, touch, and sound. When seasoning stops, when reasoning stops, you attain the knowledge of Brahma. Atma cannot be realized through this mind. Atma is realized through Atma alone. Pure mind, pure buddhi, pure Atma, all these are one and the same. Just think how many things you need to perceive an object. You need eyes, you need light, you need mind. You cannot perceive the object if you leave out any of these three. As long as the mind functions, how can you say that the universe and the I do not exist? When the mind is annihilated, when it stops deliberating pro and con, then one goes into samadhi, one attains the knowledge of Brahma. You know the seven notes of the scale sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni. One cannot keep one's voice on ni very long. I conclude this video at this stage. Next video number 47 will start with chapter number 42, Intimate Knowledge of God. Thanks you. Namaskar.